I'm glad you're here. What's the deal?
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. I'm Stephen Collins. I'm the CEO of Matter, and welcome to Tales from the Trenches. I apologize for those of you standing in the back. We don't have quite enough chairs. We did clear out, there's room for like 4 more chairs here, but we are live streaming, and we've learned through our past experience that unless we clear out a couple chairs, people's heads are in the way. So if you're looking longingly at that space and wondering why there aren't some more chairs for you, I apologize, but that's why there are not. So Tales from the Trenches, best event that Matter does every month, where we bring in an entrepreneur who has done really interesting things and is working on really interesting things. And we have one of those tonight who has come in from California from this event. So Ted Meisel, who is an serial entrepreneur. He's an investor in quite a number of healthcare companies. Very interesting background and somewhat unusual. He was a wildly successful, sort of more of a classic .com entrepreneur who caught the healthcare bug and has since been building healthcare companies and investing in healthcare companies. And it'll be interesting to hear kind of that trajectory and how he sort of transformed from internet entrepreneur into healthcare entrepreneur. He's going to be interviewed tonight by Eric Langscher, who has been a guest of this program in the interviewee seat. So he didn't have so bad of an experience that he was willing to come back and sit on in the other chair. So Eric is a co-founder of AVIA. He's a co-founder of Abundant Venture Partners. He's a New York Times best-selling author, serial entrepreneur who's built a number of companies. He's invested in lots of companies. Also a really interesting gentleman in his own right. And he will be asking the questions and really moderating the conversation. A couple other things before we get started. We're using social QA, as we always do for these things. So you can ask a question via matter.socialqa.com. That also applies for those of you who are watching the live stream. Eric will get those questions and be able to sort of filter them and ask them of Ted at the appropriate time. The second thing is I just want to mention a really special event that we have going on next week. It is the culmination of a global challenge to source solutions to help people living with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. We will be giving out $1 million next Wednesday evening to 3 winners of this challenge. There were a couple of hundred entries that was whittled down to about 80. Then through the judging was whittled down to 9, and the 9 finalists are coming in from all over the country and all over the world to make their pitches next week, and the top 3 will split up $1 million of cash. Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is a terminal condition. It's a lung scarring disease. It has an unknown sort of etiology, and what we were really looking for was solutions that could help with earlier diagnosis and improve the quality of life of people who are living with this condition. So it'll be a really sort of special event for us. It's next Wednesday evening. If you're interested, you can go on our website and sign up. So with that, please join me in welcoming Ted and Eric.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here tonight, and thank you for joining us this evening. And T, thank you for joining us, and I'd be willing to share your wisdom and your story. So I'm going to be keeping track of questions on social QA and just sort of peppering them into the conversation as we go. So just start with them, and I think you've got the instructions on the board how to submit a question. This is going to be fun. T is going to be, I call Ted T, a little term of endearment. And I mean that seriously because I feel very, just great friendship, great love for T, who's not just a business partner and has been for some time. I'm a co-founder at AVIA, but we're great friends. We have made a bunch of investments together. We sit on a bunch of boards together, and we spend a lot of weekend mornings talking on the phone.
This will be completely objective.
Exactly, totally. So this is actually super fun for me, for all those difficult conversations that we've had.
I feel a little vulnerable.
So we have a lot to talk about. Let me read a little list here, because T, as Steve mentioned, T's had a really incredible career. And see if you can track this logical path, right? So grew up in Long Island and moved to DC for high school. Went to Dartmouth undergrad, was a consultant with both Mercer and McKinsey. Then went to Stanford Law School, and we're going to unpack that in a few minutes. He's been an early stage CEO of a bunch of companies, including City Search and Overture Services. He chairs a significant and important policy group, a bipartisan group in DC called the Hope Street Group. We can talk about that too. He's been Bono's business partner at Elevation Partners, where he's still a senior advisor, president of Yahoo Search. Yahoo bought Overture for $2 billion, so a wonderful exit for T. Sits on many boards, and then, lest I forget, last year really engaged in service for our country and acted as a senior advisor in CMS to help with the macro rollout. So, really kind of scratching that policy wonk itch that T has. All right, so we got a lot to get to, but let's start with the early T. So you're living in Long Island, and your family moves to DC. What was that like?
Well, first of all, no 15-year-old wants to move, period.
Right.
But we moved, and we moved from a bedroom community an hour outside of the city to Bethesda, Maryland, just outside the district. Turned out it was actually incredible. It was fantastic in ways when I look back on it. So I got to scratch the wonky itch early and work on Capitol Hill for a Senate committee early on. It was just super exciting. Whether I was getting the turkey on wheat toasted with the bacon steamed or senator, or I got writing a paragraph of a committee, which ironically was the first time Congress had actually ever addressed the medical records privacy. Was the little piece of the committee report that I wrote up because it was not a big deal at that point. And the computerizing everybody's healthcare records was just somebody's eye, not many of them. So it was in the end exciting move, and of course great to test coming out of your your comfort zone. New friends, new world.
Did you ever imagine that you'd become an entrepreneur when you're deep inside the Beltway?
So no, I didn't. But the thing about that is my father, and I didn't fully appreciate, because he was in manufacturing, and I couldn't have imagined myself in manufacturing, so I didn't even think about it. But when I look back in hindsight, in there.
Got it. So you graduate from high school, and you're thinking about college. Why Dartmouth?
Well, I'm to stereotype myself. I'm a Jewish kid from Long Island. So
Right.
if it were
Yeah. So here's an interesting little factoid that I know about T, that he has taken a ski trip with a large group of college buddies basically every year since Dartmouth. Like, what is it about you that has pulled this, this loyalty thing into your life and stayed with the friends that you've got from all walks of life? Uh-huh. Yeah, his wisdom is so profound. He needs 2 mics. Yeah.
that clear? Is that clear? Well, thanks for the premise of the question. That is, one of the great joys of life is to be able to have a group of friends that you carry through. But just to preempt a question, because I know you talked to my wife Hope before, so I'm gonna do this to myself. The great thing about that ski trip is one year I went twice. It turns out that we were supposed to go on March 14th, but I got confused. And so on February 14th, I showed up in Whistler and started calling around and asking everybody where they were and how do I get to the meeting spot, the condo that I'm sure we were staying in. And I was able to do an advanced scouting run.
Very nice.
So which I think the guys really appreciate. So
you
they
had to
appreciated
call
my
Hope and say, I need to stay for the month until the boys show up.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Did you lose your wallet while you were there? Or did
Not on that trip. Not on that trip. Yeah.
All right, so you made the statement in a kind of a throwaway fashion that one of the joys of life are friendships and relationships. But what about your upbringing, led you to sort of have that value perspective?
I don't really know how we get shaped, and I could, you look at your kids, I look at my kids. I have two very different kids, same house. I'm not sure what makes them different, but I think from an early age I valued. I was more interested in deeper relationships and maybe more and broader relationships. And so I guess I was lucky enough that it stuck with me.
Mm. Well, let's pull on that thread for a minute. One of the things about working with Ted that's really remarkable is when you're talking with him, in the spirit of deeper relationships, you have his full attention. So he's, we all multitask. I multitask, and it's not a good habit. So, a lot of the times when I'm in a conversation with someone on the phone, I'll be, banging away on email. He doesn't do that. So, and you can feel it, right? People who work with you can feel it, and it's sort of this common kind of refrain about what it is to have a conversation with you, because people experience you and having your full attention, so going deeper. So what drives that? How do you think about that?
Well, first of all, thanks for putting it that way, because I think I've heard some people characterize that as, that was so intense. Do I have to do that again?
Right.
How often? From an early age, I had this ability to focus, and I preferred to zero in. And it's interesting. I mentioned different kids, different ways of being. So my youngest has that, and I feel like I'm only she's taken it to another level. So she's able to tune everybody out. You can go talk to her about anything. She doesn't pay attention. I think I was able, for example, when I was doing my homework as a kid, I was able to absorb all the episodes of the Brady Bunch
At the same time.
while I was doing my homework.
Nice. Yeah. So you graduate from Dartmouth, and then what?
Graduated from Dartmouth, had no idea what I wanted to do, so I applied to law school. Thought I really wasn't ready to go back to school. So I did the next best option creating, put off the future kind of thing, which is to go work for a management consulting firm. So I ended up working for Mercer, what was then called Strategic Planning Associates in Washington, D.C. There's a whole set of BCG spin-offs in that day that were a little more quantitative than McKinsey, and that's where I ended up. And it was D.C. I quickly got bored because I wasn't motivated by the mission at that time, and looked for trouble, actually. And the place that I found it most easily was to help open Strategic Planning Associates Singapore office. So I was really lucky early on that I had this opportunity, this really safe opportunity to go build an overseas office of a company.
How old were you?
23.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Think about that, right?
Yeah. It's fantastic.
Really cool. So how many years then before you went to law school?
So 2 years. 2 years I was there, and I watched all my. It was a group of largely expats from around the world that started this office, and then the idea was to build the region, and of course hire people that were from the region. And what I found was that increasingly they were making commitments to stay for one personal reason or another, and I realized that it would be best if I didn't get myself tied at that age. So going back to grad school was my way of forcing myself back.
Right, great. So you finished law school. Actually, let's talk about law school for a minute. What did you get out of it? By the way, one of the things that I love, I wish I had $1 for every time I heard T say, "I'm really not a lawyer," because when in the work that we do, legal issues and questions all the time, and we always say, "Well, T, you're a lawyer."
Yeah. Well, it's
All this.
right. So I went to law school because I had an interest in public policy, and I thought it would be a potential path back to that, and might be a path even to being an entrepreneur. It was, of course, not. It's not the right path to be an entrepreneur, but it was interesting. And the great thing about law school, when you're not worried about which big firm you're going to work for, is you can focus on great professors and great courses. And I was lucky enough to be at Stanford, where I was able to cross over and take courses in other places. It was great. I also got a much better jump shot out of it, which was really important to me at the time.
Yeah, nice. Are you glad you did it?
I am.
Yeah.
I am, but it took a little while to appreciate.
Right. And did you ever consider doing an MBA?
I did, actually. In fact, I applied to some JD MBA programs in the spirit of being indecisive. And I got there and I realized, with 3 years of management consulting behind me, and I really didn't need an MBA, and law school was going to be a great experience, and I would be ready to go off into the world.
Got it. So here you are now, going off into the world from law school.
Still trying to figure out what to do when I grow up.
And so what do you do?
Right. So, so out of law school, right, I ended up with another very decisive move. I went back to consulting and paid off law school debts. And then but the real, so the real story of me was that I was I was very irreverent as a consultant. I was at McKinsey, which is the worst place in the world to be irreverent, really.
Yes.
And I learned a lot there, and I also learned that wasn't ultimately the best place for me. I was really interested in going and building companies, and so that's what I finally figured out there. When it was time for me to make that decision, and I knew it for real when a senior partner who's a terrific guy and a friend sat me down and said, "Okay, good news. We're about to make you a junior partner, and what you do as a junior partner is you develop your program for partner. What distinctive knowledge, client base, other assets are you going to contribute to the firm and develop in order to be elected to be partner? And what I want you to do is think about that and come back to me. Let's talk again in a couple weeks, a month." I went home. I sat down with a piece of paper and a pencil to think about it, and it's like the line out of a chorus line, and I felt nothing. I felt nothing. I won't break into song to save the innocent. I didn't resonate with that, and so it's clear to me at that time in the world the internet was starting, and I was.
This is circa
95.
95.
95. So I'd been interested. I'd been working a little bit on it as a consultant. I was a self-taught computer programmer in all of today's obsolete languages. I'd been a professional in 2 professions. So I was really interested in information services. And here's this internet thing started.
And you're living
in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And so I decided that's where I had to go.
Great. So one of the top questions on social QA here is, why do you think the McKinsey Mafia has been so successful? Like, what does McKinsey do to make the alum network so strong and powerful?
First of all, it's just a really big network, right? So it outnumbers other networks considerably. Second, McKinsey does, to give credit where it's due, a really excellent job in training people in a common set of communication tools and values. So I think that McKinsey people come to believe that when they meet other McKinsey people, there's a certain, a common set of experiences and approaches that they can rely on. And third, there's the secret handshake,
which you're going to teach us, right? We got the camera.
If there's time.
All right, so we're now in the mid-90s, and you do what? You join CitySearch.
I joined CitySearch. CitySearch was an early version of Yelp. It's the simplest way to explain it. We weren't smart enough to really figure out Yelp, but if we were, that's what it would have been.
How many employees?
CitySearch at its peak probably had about 1,000 people.
Got it. And then the leap from CitySearch to Overture?
So 2.5 years at CitySearch, did a bunch of different jobs from building CitySearch New York to running products and technologies. And Overture came, we just sold the company to Barry Diller's Internet something corporation, IAC.
IAC, yeah.
Right, IAC. And so I thought it was an interesting time to look up. A CitySearch alum had co-founded Overture. And Overture had this crazy idea that you could produce better search results using economics and simultaneously create a business model for the internet. And I thought it was just contrarian enough that it might work. So it was the right time, right place, and I made the jump.
Now, I had heard someone say, and I don't know if this is true, that Overture, before Groupon, had the distinguished reputation of being the fastest growing company in the U.S. I know you went from 50 to 500 people in a year and a bit. Is that true?
Yeah, I think we used to say it when it mattered.
All right. Okay.
But we went from 0 to $1 billion in 5.5 years.
Yeah.
What was neat about that, and in many ways really right place, right time, was that we grew through the bursting of the bubble. So
right.
So we were one of the very few companies that was growing.
Lived on the other side
at a time when everybody fell off a cliff. Now, most companies came back, or many companies came back, but we had the opportunity to be one of the few things that.
So tell us what that was like. So it's the late '90s, which is the irony is it's kind of like today. You turn on the TV in the morning and you'd see what was going on with the market. I was like, God, this is so great, and there you were, right, just in the heart of it, running this high growth company, going from 0 to $1 billion.
Yeah.
So what was it like?
So pre-bubble, it was just weird.
Yeah.
It was just weird. Yeah, I think I've told you this story. I walked in. I started at Overture as president and COO, and we were at a point when the financing window was closed, and I don't know if for anyone that remembers back then, the window would be open, meaning that VCs had lots of money to deploy, and then it would be closed. And you'd say this is the beginning of the end, and then it'd be open and closed. So anyway, I joined, and it was closed. Company had just raised $24 million, which is a lot of money back then, and my instructions were to take it to profitability on that. And so I started to do what a typical president and COO might do, which is to lay out the metrics that the company would need to follow and the growth plan, write a real business plan, so I thought I'm all ready for the next board meeting when we come in, and I walk into the next board meeting, and we're talking through. By the way, I should say I'm fast forwarding a little bit. Actually, the financing window opened again. 2 months later, after I was told there's no more money, we were racing to complete a public offering. So we were going public. We did go public on I think our first quarter was $1.9 million in revenue. Yeah, and a $700 million valuation. But Overture.
But you were.
Had a lower valuation than other companies that might be considered peers. Some had $1 billion valuation, some had $1.5 billion, $2 billion. So the question on the table in the boardroom was, I remember this distinctly, was what are you doing about stock price? So I thought, I know what that question's about. You're asking me, right, what are we doing to make sure we can continue to grow the company and deliver on our numbers to the street? So I pull out the metrics, and I start to walk the board members through it. And after about 5 minutes, the board member that asked this question said, no. That is not what I'm asking. That's not what I want to know. I want to know your strategy for the stock price. That's what I'm answering. No. What's your press release strategy? What are you doing tomorrow to change the stock price to argue that we should have a higher stock price? So that was pre-bubble. That's really what it was like.
Right.
Pre-bubble.
The good old days.
Crazy.
So we were on a board call on Friday, and the CEO asked of the board, because the company is now going through a great growth spurt, and the CEO had the self-awareness to ask the question, what advice do you all have about managing growth? And you lived in the heart of hypergrowth. So how did you manage that?
Probably not so well.
Well, obviously well enough. $2 billion
is the answer.
Well,
I did. There's a lot you could say about that time. Probably a lot of lessons learned. Two things that I did that, and actually I learned these lessons from City Search, and I learned them from a great team that I had the opportunity to work with there. One was to focus on people, and so that's trite. But what I helped my team at Overture do was to hire their next level at a level well above what they thought they needed. that was one thing. And the other thing was to set the culture, because if we were actually going to grow from 50 to 500 people in that period of time, it's pretty clear that my influence on the 500th person was going to be really tiny, really tiny. And so we better hire well, and we better create norms and an understanding about how we want to run the place that transcends, me, for sure, and the CEO at the time, and the team, my team. So I led a process to create the Overture Constitution, which was fairly corny, but at the end we wrote this 6-line document that was relatively poorly written, but really authentic, that captured our values, and that everybody understood, at least those 50, 60 people, understood what it meant. We had a signing ceremony, and that carried us till...
When was the last time you read it?
Well, it's been a little while.
Is there anything on when you think about it that kind of makes you cringe?
A lot of it makes me cringe, actually. Yeah, I mean, the statements are fairly trite, like valuing performance, and I think the sophistication that people apply to those.
Yeah, it's different.
After cycles and cycles of different, but it worked. I think the important thing was the exercise of walking through it and taking the time to do it.
Got it. Great. So I went to the Internet machine and found a little research here. And here's a headline from 2002. So the bubble has burst. What are you doing in revenue in 2002?
600 million.
600 million. This is Overture CEO brushes off doubters. Short interests keep rising, but the business keeps on growing, says CEO Ted Meisel. So, short interest is rising. It's a little bit of an indictment on your performance as a CEO. How did you react when you read about stories like that in the media?
Yeah. Well, obviously, first my job was to brush off short interest, right? But what happened following the bubble bursting, and I'm not sure what the month was of that story. Our company was not profitable, and we obviously had to be cognizant of the fact that we were probably not going to be able to raise more cash, at least not for a few years, and we had to get there. So one of the things that we had to do was make a plan that was in our control to get to cash flow break even. And at the time, we had made 2 acquisitions that would have been valuable acquisitions. One was in internet shopping, one was in internet auctions. Both would have been enormously valuable. Both were using lots of cash, and we had to make the decision to divest of both of those companies. Those were hard decisions. In the end, we probably would have squeaked through without it, but we didn't know. And so one thing we had to do was that. And so in some ways that was, I don't know if it was a response to the shorts per se, but they were betting that we wouldn't get there.
Yeah, interesting. So today, what would the 54-year-old T tell the 30-year-old T in terms of, you're in these moments of adversity, which is kind of, a lot of what we do. We deal with problems and challenges, about how to even just frame and think about dealing with challenges.
Yeah, I think that look, it's such an advantage to have been there, because first of all, there's a little bit of pattern matching to rely on, and that's great. There's less energy, but some pattern matching. I think what I would have done differently is to rely on my team in frankly a better way. And I would have, and I think when you're that, by the way, it wasn't 30 to be frankly fair to them, but I had less experience in delegating in a really quality way And that's a learned skill, although I see some younger entrepreneurs do it really well. I don't know how they do that. For me, it was practice. But I think that's the best way to work through those kinds of situations.
Thoughtful. Classic. That's kind of classic. So then you sell Overture to Yahoo. You join as president of Yahoo Search. And so now you're going into the belly of the beast. What did you learn?
Yeah. So Yahoo was a great, really interesting experience, and a lot has been said and written about Yahoo. It was the company of its time.
Jerry Yang still there?
Jerry was there. So that was 2003. And what Yahoo went through the same experience that other internet companies did. So it had, although it had lots of revenue that was mostly funded by venture firms investing in other internet companies, which then handed their capital over to Yahoo in the form of revenue to Yahoo in order to have the rights to channels, essentially. That was the business model. And so Yahoo really had to reinvent its business model. So Yahoo did what most companies did, which was to try to bring in adult supervision at the time. And in Yahoo's case, it was a guy named Terry Semel, who had been the CEO of Warner Brothers, a very experienced guy who'd also been around the block, had done a few deals in his time running a movie and television studio. Now I thought, so when I joined, I was a CEO who had skipped a few steps on the way to becoming a CEO. I joined as the head of a division, albeit the division that was almost half of Yahoo's revenue, but a division. And I thought I'd learn a lot from the team I was working with. So I went with that in mind, and put my head down and focused on trying to grow Overture's revenue inside Yahoo and make sure the team stayed and all of that. But I think I learned the challenge of integrating cultures. Mm-hmm. We had done it on the other side, and I had done it as a CEO, but now I got to be the acquired and see it through that lens, and had some classic acquired experiences. Had the corporate team listen to 20 people in corporate. I wasn't sure what role each person played, but to listen to and snicker at our first budget presentation. Those kinds of experiences. I think in the end, it was a talented team, like lots of acquired CEOs, I had a vision about how I would have run the company. They had a vision about how they wanted to run the company, and they needed to follow their vision.
Right.
And I needed to step aside for them to do that.
So we're going to speed up a little bit and try to get to healthcare. So this is a challenge in chatting with T. But on the way there, we got to make one stop, because you then joined Elevation Partners as Bono's partner. You got to tell us a Bono story, just because it's super cool.
So I get a call from an acquaintance who I knew of. I didn't know particularly well. And he said, hey, we're a bunch of guys that have spun out from Silver Lake and Blackstone and Electronic Arts and Bono and Apple. We just raised about $2 billion and started a fund a year ago. And we're looking for an internet partner. Would you have any interest? And so I was, I was not schooled in the way of these things. Actually, I think the short version of that is I was an idiot. And so I said, no, not really. I mean, investing is kind of the dark side, and you guys are up north. And if I were to, you'd probably want me to travel a lot. And if I'm going to do that, I'd love to run something. So I don't know, but I'm on the beach for now, and if I'd be happy to work with you, maybe half a day a week, if that could be helpful. And so anyway, so the Bono story is they said sure, and they humored me and put me in a West Hollywood hotel room with Bono for the day 2 weeks later, right? And said, right, so we'll see if you're still you're still so casual about it. So anyway, I spent the day with Bono, and it was not what I expected, right? Because rock and roll star, and I made all the assumptions you'd make about that, he is what we've now come to know him as.
What he's done with his fame.
Smart, thoughtful, super high EQ, interested in elevation for a variety of reasons, from being the CEO of a mid-sized entertainment company called U2 to trying to have an influence on the world and wanting to know better how capital moves and everything in between, and was an active participant actually in the fund. He didn't run many spreadsheets. I found an error or two in his numbers, but he was facile. I agree.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so now to healthcare. Why? Like, what are you thinking? So you're in at the peak of tech, in tech land. Why healthcare?
So I found myself at Elevation focusing on ad models. And at the same time, a friend of mine from McKinsey had asked me to join the board of a not-for-profit he had started. He and the founders of that not-for-profit were concerned about the effect that globalization and technology were going to have on the middle class. And that was in 2001.
Prescient.
Yeah, way ahead of his time. And the organization had just started to focus on influencing candidates, both sides for president, both sides of the aisle, education, healthcare, workforce development, and they were trying to figure out how to operationalize this. And it was just the kind of challenge that I got attracted to. So I joined the board. I later I now chair the board, as you referenced. I got super interested in social sector challenges and decided that was, for me, going to be my next challenge. I became way more interested in that than new media models.
Right.
And that was.
Did you ever anticipate it would be so satisfying in some respects and so difficult in others?
So the thought I remember having when I redirected into healthcare was, I'm sure I'm not the first. I know I'm not the first tech guy who went into healthcare. I've talked to some venture folks about it. They said they tried it. They found that they lost a bunch of money. They went away from it. So I'll probably get my hat handed to me. And it's so whatever I do, this needs to be 10 to 20 years. This is not I'm smarter than anybody else, because there are a lot of smart people trying stuff. It's going to be really hard in ways that I could imagine but wasn't really sure of, and it's been a learning experience ever since.
Right. So that's a beautiful segue to this top question, which is, what are the suggestions that you'd give to someone starting out in healthcare entrepreneurship?
Right. So I don't know. I'm not sure if this is a good answer, but I just started reading and talking to all the smart people I could about how healthcare actually worked, and I'm still deeply into learning. And what's interesting about it is good products are important, but they don't win. The whole trick in healthcare, as all of you know, is to find a business model, right? That that aligns with the product. You don't have to do that in any other sector, right? If the product delivers value, typically that's enough, right? That's enough. In healthcare, that's not quite enough. It's much more about sub-segmenting and finding the niche where there's a segment
surprise
payment
you?
model. It didn't surprise me, but it surprises me, and yet,
Today,
every
yeah.
day, every day.
What's the biggest thing about the industry that surprises
The
you?
extent to which it matters.
Yeah.
You know, so look, you know, the biggest thing that I wish were different, I don't know if it surprises me, but I wish were different, is we live in a world where every day we worry about the money. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about making. I'm sure most people here are in it because they're at least partially mission motivated. There are probably better ways to make money in most cases, but every day we have to spend a lot of our time talking about how the money flows. And when we visit customers for all kinds of reasons, we are talking about revenue models first or second, but at least it's very prominent. And I think we all wish that were different.
Right. So when we started AVIA, we had the conversations about the challenge that it was going to be to build this network. Why, what attracted you to that challenge? Because it was kind of crazy ambitious in a lot of ways.
It was, and it still is.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So, when I visited, I remember visiting with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and investors. This was a while ago, so 10 years ago, and asking, so what do we need to do to change the healthcare system? And I got a Silicon Valley kind of answer, which is blow it up, work around them, other and answers like that. And it didn't ring true to me as someone that was also doing policy work at the time. So, the question was, how can we help healthcare systems? Because healthcare systems were rapidly becoming the unit of the day that was going to deliver healthcare. And how can we help healthcare systems to do this faster? So AVIA was this crazy idea we had about helping them do it faster by leveraging new solutions that were in the market. And we were seeing these investment in new solutions, and you and I were living the challenge of helping healthcare systems adopt new solutions, which and I had a cadence mismatch with small firm and large firm, new solution and established solutions, technology and service, you name it. And we really wanted to figure out how to bridge that.
Right. So Jordan was here. Jordan Schlane, who's a founder of HealthLoop, and he was sitting in that chair, and Rishi was interviewing him. And Jordan, I kind of shared the story of a taxi cab ride where he was telling you about a tool that he developed for his own patients, and that you inspired him, said, hey, there's a business in there. So how do you, how do you go about, and how do you think about spotting good ideas and good entrepreneurs?
By the way, at that point, we were leaving a Hope Street Group event where we did a piece of work on reinventing primary care. Jordan was leading a piece of the work, and the idea he had just rang true. It was at a time that I was looking for physicians who had put a bunch of time into creating platforms that would enable them to be way more productive in serving their patients. And HealthLoop is about, for those of you who don't know, is about digitizing the protocols doctors use to take care of their patients, let them focus on the ones that are out of range in their recovery, and stay close to them every day by giving them education and things, what they needed to do. And it just, it seemed right. Jordan is, is clearly an entrepreneur who is going to turn over every rock and run through every brick wall to make it happen. And so that's the kind of person I wanted to invest in and with. And I thought it'd be fun.
Right, which things with Jordan are
always fun.
Always fun. So you've done all these different things. What has been the most satisfying for you?
So AVIA remains deeply satisfying, and we have a lot of work to do. Obviously, we've earned the right to serve 31 healthcare systems. And now we actually have to help them really accelerate their pace, the pace at which they absorb innovations. And we're doing that, but that is hard and satisfying work, change management. I'm a glutton for that kind of punishment and hard problem. And so I love that. On the other hand, WiserCare, shared decision making, is a passion. It's in that area zone of right thing to do for patient, and challenging to get the business model right. I think we're just about to do it. Fortunately, with a new CEO who replacing me, who played CEO last year. That'll be much better for the company. So both of those are really deeply satisfying.
By the way, he's not being modest. He's right. It is true. This is the next upvoted question, which I'm excited to hear you answer. What inspired you to focus on the senior population's needs?
Two things. One is, I have parents, and I think we're at an age where I have parents that have gone through a range of healthcare experiences and taking care of them. So that's been one, including a stepfather who had a bout with cancer that he ultimately succumbed to, and a mother who is getting older and dealing with the indignities and the challenges of aging. And then the other answer is with my policy hat on. You have to pay attention to it because that's where we spend money.
Right. So another great question, what books helped you shape your understanding of healthcare, and what recommendations do you have in terms of learning and coming up to speed?
Yeah, I found, I thought Zeke Emanuel's book on the Affordable Care Act was incredibly helpful. It was actually really well written and explained it well. All of Atul Gawande's stuff, which explains how healthcare works from a practitioner's point of view, and then the wonk in me read the book about how on this journey that we've been on in understanding utilization of healthcare, from the work of a young doctor named Jack Wenberg in the 60s, trying to make sure that we were able to get these new advances into the hands of people, to the Dartmouth Atlas, and our understanding of overutilization of care as well.
Great. So we've got 5 minutes left. If you were to distill everything that you've learned from the tech industry, from healthcare industry, into just targeted advice for healthcare entrepreneurs, what would you say to them?
Be patient. Come at it with patience.
So what does that mean in terms of?
Probably the most important thing that means is making sure that your investors understand that the cycle, particularly if they're tech investors, that the cycle here is a little different. That you can, there are two aspects to return: risk, risk and reward, of course, right? And the reward can be there. It might take a little longer to get to. You can do things to de-risk it. There'll be lots of acquirers for your technologies and service, many more than in tech, but it will take a little longer to get there and prove it.
Great. So people joke, of course, that it takes twice as long and twice as much money. It really does. Why is that, and what can entrepreneurs do to account for it and adjust?
I think our ecosystem is becoming a lot smarter about that. So look, I was this naive too to think we'd build a better product and we'd get the business model right around it. So now you have to design the business model from the beginning, and I think if you do that, you can cut some cycle time.
Right. And so how do you design that business model? How do you test proof of concept, and how do you how do you analyze?
Yeah, find customers in advance of building. Not unlike what we do in other sectors, but it's just that much more important in healthcare.
Right, right. And can you tell us just a quick story of a great idea in healthcare that that didn't get liftoff?
Well, I've had as an investor, I've had some near-death experiences, and I don't think the story's not written yet, but this idea of taking protocols, bringing more evidence to care, and helping use it to design protocols that will help people receive better care and help practitioners to deliver better care more efficiently and effectively is the right idea. We're going to see everybody practice that way. But companies struggle to make that work. And while there are HealthLoops and WiserCares that are getting traction but are not done yet, not out of the woods, there are other companies in the space that are not. Because it's tough to get it just right. So it's there's a lot of stick-to-itiveness, a lot of building the ecosystem, a lot of building it for the longer term.
Right. All right. So let's wrap with a lightning round. All right. Just one sentence answers, and maybe if you can do it in one word, even better. We'll start with an easy one. Uber or Lyft?
Lyft.
A favorite new app?
FlightAware.
Number of angel investments you have?
About 25.
What job would you really suck at?
Stage manager.
Do you own any Bitcoin?
No.
Worst investment?
Missing Facebook at $1 billion.
Yeah, when did you guys get in?
At Elevation, the partners had an opportunity to invest individually at around that level. As a firm, we got in later.
Yeah.
Still a good it was still an excellent investment, but it wasn't quite as excellent.
Right. Yeah. What's the market cap now?
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Where do you get your news?
New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Fox.
Nice. What skill would you like to master?
I'd like to learn how to sing.
Oh, that's where we got to end. Yeah. Let's see. I'll ask you one more from the list here. You talked about Facebook. Oh yeah, let's end with a policy-oriented question. There is massive consolidation happening in the provider world. What does that mean to healthcare entrepreneurs? It's a great question.
Yeah, I think it cuts two ways. Fewer customers, for sure, fewer customers. But the customers have more capacity to buy from us, and in part they're consolidating in order to do that. So there's good news in that. Also, we're going to see continued consolidation because it's the right model. But we are seeing, from a policy standpoint, certain policy moves that will probably also delay that. So, in the Obama administration, when we launched Macro, we exempted a group of physicians from participating in Macro, which was more requirements, even though Macro is in certain ways deregulating compared to the set of other requirements. And this administration's taken it a step further and exempted about 2/3 of Medicare physicians. So I think that the path to consolidation is going to be uneven, And I wouldn't, I think I'd just be cautious about betting on too much or too little in the near term. Pick your segment, you know, and stick to it. And healthcare is obviously big enough that there's a market.
Perfect. It is certainly big enough, and it needs everyone's help here. So thank you, T, and thank you all for joining us. Yeah.
Thank you.